Hi, my name is Ashley and I'm a mom of 2 little girls. I have a 5-year-old named Kylie and I also have a 3-year-old named Mia. So today I have a short and sweet video for you that is going to be answering a fairly common question that I receive every so often, and it sounds a little something like this. Help, I'm doing Montessori at home with my child and I have set up their shelf perfectly with all of these wonderful activities and my child does not want to do any of them. What is going on? Am I doing something wrong? And what should I do about it? So from one busy parent to another, today I would like to dive into all of the details on exactly what to do when your child is not interested in their shelf work. So if you've ever found yourself in this situation, then I want you to know one thing up front. You are not alone. We have all been there at some point or another, myself included. And you know what? It doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong, but what it does mean is that you do need to take a step back for a few moments and observe to figure out exactly what is the root of the issue. Why is your child not interested in the things that are on the shelf? And to be honest, it could be any number of reasons. And without a complete context, it's often really difficult for me to help somebody navigate exactly what's going on. But what I can do, and this is the goal for today's video, is to give you a couple of things to consider, almost like a little mental checklist that you can run through for yourself to try to get to the bottom of it. You get to play detective for a little bit to try to figure out exactly what is going on and to decide if you even really need to do anything about it at all, because as you'll learn in a little bit, you might not need to. Okay, so let's say that you have spent all of this time researching and putting together these beautiful Instagram-worthy activities for your child. You know, the trays are incredibly attractive and inviting looking. You carefully put them on the shelf. They're all arranged nicely. And then you're just basically, waiting to see what your child's reaction is going to be. And then when that moment comes, your child comes down to the shelf, they notice there's something new there, they go over to look at it, and then they walk the other direction. Or maybe they play with it for like a second or even a few minutes at most, and then they just kind of abandon it and that's the end of it. And you're left with this sinking feeling in your heart, right? Like, what did I do wrong? That's really weird. I thought for sure this was going to be a hit. What happened? I have been there. I know exactly what it feels like. So when this happens, I want to encourage you first and foremost to avoid the temptation to drag your child back over and be like, here, look, here's this new activity I set up and here's how it works. And you're all excited about it, but your child is not quite there yet. I want you to avoid that if possible, because the more you are shoving it in your child's face and the more you're kind of harping on it, the more likely you are to meet resistance. So instead, I want you to try as much as you can to just, dust it off. It's not a big deal. We're just gonna take a step back and spend some time observing and thinking about all the possible reasons why this could have been your child's reaction. And the first one that I want you to consider is it developmentally appropriate? Sometimes we see these beautiful, fun-looking activities online and we think, wow, that's so fun. And it's actually not developmentally appropriate for our child's age. And what I mean by this is you'll often see lots of activities that are designed for the preschool age, and people will set them up for their toddlers and wonder why it's not working with their toddlers. And it could simply just be that it's a little bit too advanced for your toddler. Now, that's not to say that activities that are intended for preschool can't be modified to be workable for a toddler. But what I'm saying is basically if you just take it as is from Instagram and throw it on your shelf and it's not meeting your child's current skills that they're working on as far as like fine motor skills go and things like that, then your child's not going to be able to do it successfully. Or they might not even really understand what the purpose of the activity is. And so you might have lost their interest right from the get-go simply because of that. So at this point, you might be asking yourself, well, how do I know what's developmentally appropriate then? And that's a completely fair question. Unless you have a background in child development, it might be difficult to know the answer to that question at any given age. But there is a beautiful thing called the internet, and you can basically Google anything about child development and get some semblance of a guideline to follow to kind of figure out where your child should be. And the key operative word there is should, because every child, as we know, is on their own unique timeline. So just because it says that your child should be able to do XYZ at 27 months does not necessarily mean that your child will be doing those things. Naturally, some children will be a little bit behind that schedule. Some children will be a little bit ahead of that schedule. That is completely within the range of normal, like the standard bell curve, if you will. So don't fret if you see something and you're like, oh no, my child's not doing that yet. It's okay. They might just need a little bit of extra time. Now, obviously, if something is so far behind that it is of concern to your child's pediatrician, that's a different ballgame. But for the most part, there is actually quite a wide range in variation for what's considered normal. So just keep that in mind when you are online looking at child development milestone charts and things like that. Just use them as a guideline. Don't get caught in this trap of comparing your child to this one-size-fits-all idea of the average, all right? I don't want to get you overly worried unnecessarily. And honestly, I think there's a better strategy that you could also be putting into play at the same time, and it's to use your powers of observation. This is actually a really big thing in the Montessori approach, is to spend time observing your individual child, because that is going to give you so much more information that you can actually use the very next day and, kind of put it into action and do something that is effective for your child. And what exactly do I mean by observation? I mean actually sitting down and spending some time observing your child, even if it's just for a few minutes. So what that looks like is finding a time when your child is engaged in some independent play. So you're not involved in any way at all. You're just kind of off on the sidelines. Maybe you have a little notebook with a pen or a pencil, or you just have your phone open with the Notes app or something, whatever you're comfortable with. But you are watching your child while they're playing and observing and writing down everything that they do as objectively as possible and in as much detail as possible. So you're paying attention to the tiny things that you might otherwise miss when you're just regularly interacting with them. So you're looking at their facial expressions, and you're looking at how they're moving their hands and their fingers, what kind of a grip they're using. Is it palmar, or are they using a pincer grip? Are they using one hand more predominantly than the other? How do they get up to stand? How do they sit down? How are they moving their feet when they walk? What activities are they drawn to? Which ones are they completely ignoring? How long are they spending with any one particular activity? Like everything that you can possibly get for this tiny little chunk of time. And you will be surprised how much information you will get from going through this process than you would ordinarily. I know it sounds tedious, but it's just like 5-10 minutes for starters, okay? Just try it out and trust me, you will be shocked at some of the things that you notice your child is doing that you may have never noticed before. And what's great about this process is that you can now kind of see, you've honed in on exactly what skills your child is very clearly trying to master. So maybe they're trying to master particular kinds of movements with their fingers or their hands, or maybe they're really focused on moving objects from one place to another. Or maybe they are just very interested in a lot of gross motor movements. You see a lot of up and down and moving all around the room, and not really any, sitting engaged focus on one thing in particular. So there are a lot of different things that you might observe, I guess is what I'm getting at, but you have to spend the time to sit down and watch to be able to figure out what those things are. And then once you have that information, you can then go back to the drawing board and compare it to whatever activities you had put on the shelf and figure out, okay, does this activity line up with their natural urges, their natural development, what it is that you see them doing on their own? Do those two things mesh? And if there is a disconnect there, then that could possibly explain why your child was not interested in what you put on the shelf. So just to give you a quick example, let's say you see this really fun practical life activity online that involves the use of tweezers and moving objects from one bowl to another. Let's say they're pom-poms. So you set it up for your child, you put it on the shelf, your child goes over to the activity the next day and they pick up the tweezers and maybe stir the pom-poms around for a second. Then maybe they try to use the tweezers, but they're unsuccessful, the pom-pom falls out, and they maybe try a couple more times and get frustrated, so they just abandon the tweezers altogether and they just start using their hand. Or maybe they have no idea what they're even supposed to be doing with the activity, and so they just dump the bowl of pom-poms out and make a huge mess. Any of those things could happen if this is an activity that is developmentally inappropriate for your child's age. Perhaps your child is just a little bit too young for it. Maybe, however, it could be modified so that instead of using tweezers to transfer the pom-poms from one bowl to another, maybe they just need a large soup spoon, and that is something that they would be capable of doing. And then when you change out the implement, suddenly you find that your child is able to do it on their own, and they're a lot more excited about it, and they spend a lot more time engaged in the activity. Okay, so assessing whether or not an activity is developmentally appropriate is kind of like the first item on my mental checklist when I'm trying to figure out why a child is not interested in shelf work. And connected to this idea is whether or not it is perhaps just a little bit too challenging or a little bit too easy for your child as well. So it could be something that is developmentally appropriate for a 2-year-old or something, but maybe your individual child needs some modifications. Maybe it's just a little too challenging for them, but they'll be ready in a few weeks, like they're close. So that's something that might be the cause of why they're not really interested in doing it. And again, on the flip side, it could also be something that they've mastered a long time ago. That skill is old hat to them. They have no interest in practicing that skill anymore because it's too easy and it's boring, basically. And so when that happens, then they don't want anything to do with it either. So it really could be any of those things. And again, the only way to figure that out is to really spend some time observing. So sorry, I almost forgot to mention this next one. Something else to consider. Have you rotated the activities on your child's shelf lately? Sometimes things just get old after a while, and a quick shelf rotation is a simple, easy way to rouse your child's interest again. Another thing that you can ask yourself is how many toys and activities do you actually have on your child's shelf right now in this given moment? Because sometimes there are just too many options. Obviously, we do this with good intention. We think that the more options they have, the more likely it is they'll find something that is entertaining and all will be well. But in reality, our young children get very overstimulated very quickly, and they are much more likely to experience decision fatigue a lot faster than we might imagine. Even as adults, we experience this, right? Like if you've ever been on Netflix and you're just looking for something to watch because you're bored, it can be really hard to find something to watch. There's just too many options. And I think this is such a problem for so many people that Netflix has actually invented a button in the menu that says play something, and it will just play something random for you. So this is what's going on with our children sometimes when there are just too many options out. They're just like, forget it. I can't figure out what I want to play with, so I'm just gonna go over here and do something else. And so if you've got too many things out, then a very obviously simple solution is to pare down. General rule of thumb, usually between 6 to 8 activities per child is usually more than enough. And obviously the younger they are, the fewer activities they're going to need. And that doesn't mean that you can't have other kinds of toys, like open-ended things to play with in other areas of the house. I'm just talking about on your child's activity shelf, the things that you've got set up in trays for them that are all displayed. 6 to 8 is a good number. Okay, so let's explore another possibility of why your child is not interested in their shelf work. Let's say all of the activities that are on your child's shelf are absolutely developmentally appropriate. You are 100% sure of that. And yet your child still doesn't really seem interested in any of them. All they want to do is go off and play with their cars or their Legos, their animal figurines, whatever it happens to be that is like their obsession, in that moment of life. And they could care less about anything else unless it has something to do with that thing that they are really preoccupied with. They don't care. This happens for a lot of children, and I think that this is completely normal. It's not something that we need to be worried about per se, but I do think that it is something that you can easily use to your advantage when you are designing shelf work for your child. Now, I do want to say one thing. It is not your responsibility to make your child focus on other kinds of activities that they're not interested in doing. You can't really make somebody focus on anything, child or adult, if they don't want to. But what you can do is, like I said, use this information to your advantage. Knowing that this is what their interest is, you can put in a little bit of extra legwork, be a little bit more creative, and find ways to make these activities inviting and engaging to your child so that they do naturally want to go over and handle the materials of their own volition without you needing to prod them whatsoever. So just to give you an example, let's say that your young toddler is completely enamored with vehicles right now, okay? That's a pretty common one from what I hear. I actually talked about it in a consultation last week with somebody. But yeah, so cars is their thing. You can set up all kinds of activities that are all related to cars that work on different kinds of language and fine motor skills, things that you would normally put on a shelf for them to do. So you could use the little car figurines and set up a matching activity that involves some language cards. If your child is older, then perhaps you try a set of 3-part cards that introduces vocabulary for all different very specific kinds of construction vehicles or, sports cars, whatever their specific area of interest is. For practical life, it's very easy to set up a small bin filled with some colored rice or dry beans, bury the cars inside of that, and then give them a scoop or a pair of tweezers, something that they can use to actually get the cars out of the rice and transfer into a separate bowl. Or maybe you were really hoping for your child to work on their sponging skills, like transferring water from one place to another using a sponge and like learning that squeezing motion. So maybe you set up like a little car wash and give them a small sponge and a little bit of soap and some water in a bowl and show them how to squeeze the sponge and wash their cars. For sensorial work, super easy to set up an activity where your child is sorting the cars by color or by size or by vehicle type. For mathematics, you can have your child practice counting their cars, or maybe even using the cars as the counters themselves for like a little cards and counter style activity. Or maybe for geography and culture, you go to the library and check out a book that looks at, like what cars have looked like over the course of history. Or even better, actually get your child out of the house and go to a construction site and just stand on the sidelines and watch. Let them see the excavators and the, like the dump trucks and everything in action. Or maybe take them on a little trip to the fire station if fire trucks are their thing, and let them actually see a real fire truck and talk to a fireman in person. Or maybe you take them to like an antique car show. There are so many different ways that you can incorporate this love of cars into their learning to make it come alive for them, and to at the same time have them working on other kinds of skills without them even realizing it. So if your child is capable of the things that you have available on the shelf, but not necessarily interested because there's this other overarching interest, then I challenge you to be creative and figure out how you can incorporate their interests into the kinds of activities that you're trying to offer them. And finally, the last thing that might be going on is maybe your child is just not into the shelf work right now, honestly. Maybe they are not into the fine motor skills that are involved in a lot of these activities. Maybe they would just rather run and climb and jump and skip and move their bodies all around and get outside and get dirty and explore nature. Maybe they are just very much into this need for gross motor movement right now. This is especially true if your child has just learned how to crawl, or they've just learned how to walk, or if they're kind of like that young rambunctious toddler age where they have this constant need to move and it seems like they never stop moving. That is generally when you will find this happening most often. And it's not something to be afraid of or to be worried about. This is just your child showing you that their need to master these gross motor skills is a much stronger developmental urge than their need to sit down and do shelf work right now in this moment of time. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that it's always going to be like that. I can assure you, as they get older, things will change. They might still have a lot of energy compared to other children, perhaps, but on the whole, they will trend toward being able to sit down and do these kinds of activities for longer periods of time as they get closer to the preschool years and beyond. Toddlers, it's a very tall order to ask them to sit still for any length of time and to focus on something like that. And that's not to say that there aren't toddlers out there who don't enjoy fine motor activities, because there absolutely are. I can tell you from my own experience, my first daughter was very motivated by anything involving gross motor activity, and sitting down for a long period of time and doing anything involving her hands and fingers was not something that I expected her to do. She was much more often running around and using, her whole body for her activities. Whereas my second daughter was very into the fine motor work from like day one. It was very obvious the difference between the two of them. So again, you have to take your individual child as exactly that. They are an individual. Just because their friends aren't doing the same kinds of activities does not mean that there is something wrong with your child or that they're behind in any way. It just means that your child is who they are. And in Montessori, that's the beautiful thing. We are always encouraged to respect our child, to meet them where they're at and not actively try to change them in any way. We just respect them as unique individuals. So with that said, if you do find that your child is much more interested in gross motor development right now and they're not spending any time at the shelves, then your job is simply to think of all of the ways that you can provide more opportunities for them to practice these gross motor movements. So get them outside as much as you can, go on hikes or walks around the block with them, whatever spaces you have available. If you have a playground nearby, take them to the playground, let them get all that energy out. Even if it's just a big open field for them to run through, honestly, anything that will allow them to explore that urge and to get it out of their system, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, then that is your job right now until they are showing you that they are capable and interested in sitting down to do some of those fine motor shelf activities. Okay, friends, so I think that's just about everything I've got for you today. I really hope that you found this video helpful in either just helping you to feel less stressed about the fact that your child hasn't been spending much time at their shelf, or maybe even giving you some ideas of how you can make your child's shelf work more inviting and more appealing to them so that maybe they are eventually drawn back in. If you have any ideas of your own that you'd like to add to this discussion, then definitely please share those with us in the comments down below. If you're interested in learning more about Montessori at home or positive discipline parenting, I offer a couple of e-courses that walk you through it step by step. I also just wrote my very first book called Montessori Home, Create a Space for Your Child to Thrive, and I will put links to all of that in the description box down below. And if you are new to my channel, I also wanted to encourage you to go and check out all of the other videos that are a part of this Montessori at Home playlist. And if you find them interesting and want to watch more, then you might consider subscribing to my channel. This way you don't miss a new video, because I do upload a new one just like this one every single week. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.